Thank you so much for that very nice introduction. Thank you for having me here, and thank you all for coming this evening. I thought I would begin by talking a little bit about how the book came into being. As many of you know, I was born in South Africa, and which was a beautiful country, of course, but a strange place in many ways to grow up. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to be a writer, but the question was what to write about. Who was I? In what tradition would I write? Was I English? Well, not really, right? And did the English literature that we read at school, the Brontes and Dickens and George Eliot, did that actually reflect the reality that I was experiencing? Well, not really. December was very, very warm. And we ate the turkey and the English food and we sweated. It wasn't appropriate. So were we African? We were surrounded by black Africans who were in our homes, who were the ones who took care of us, who carried us on their backs. But they were not, we were not black, and our ancestors came from Europe. So were we Afrikaans? No, we were not descended from Dutch or German, and we didn't speak Afrikaans. So who were we? And the question, in order to answer the question, I had the idea of coming to France. And I thought, well, if I put on the cloak of a foreign language, I'll perhaps find out who I am. And France, is it not the country of the rights of man? Our history lessons stopped very early in South Africa. They didn't teach us about the First World War or the Second World War, which was considered too recent to be taught objectively. So, but we had learned about the French Revolution, and we'd read some Diderot and some Voltaire, and Rousseau and things of that kind. So I thought, well, France, I'll come to France. And so I came to France, and of course it wasn't quite what I was expecting, as things never are. I was in I was a paying guest in a French family, and they were from the petite noblesse and had sort of fallen on hard times. And they were much more interested in the paying part than the guest part of the bargain. Anyway, I did année de civilisation française. I did gradually learn some French. My life went on. And then I did, in later years, I married, and in later years came back to France. And I did attend the Institut Catholique with my good friend Jeannette Perrette, who is here tonight. And grâce à elle, j'ai réussi à passer les examens with her coaching behind me. At this Institut Catholique, we had a psychoanalyst, Dr. Barrois, il me semble, il s'appelait. Anyway, he assigned a book called, in French, it was Les Cinq Psychanalyses. And it was a very handy book because it had all 5 of them in the same book, which actually doesn't exist in the English language. You have to buy various volumes to get the 5 case histories. Anyway, I, that December, was going out to South Africa to visit my family, and diligent student, I started to read the first case history, which was the Dora case. And as we traveled through the night, I turned the pages, fascinated, dazzled by Freud's interpretations, and by the situation. This young girl, she's 17, and her father brings her to Freud, and basically says, get her to be reasonable. And Freud does his best. Anyway, as I read on, the young girl has many ailments. She's she loses her voice, she's got a terrible cough, she's got pains down her side, she's got everything you could think of. She's depressed, she's written a suicide note. As I read this and flew on and on through the night, I began to feel very ill myself. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm totally hysterical, just like this, as Freud thought this young girl was. And I too started to feel, oh, I've got a fever, or there's something really wrong with me. And when I arrived in Johannesburg, my mother was there to meet me and came out and said, you look very ill. And it turned out I actually was very ill, and it was not from hysteria or anything else, but I had caught the measles from one of my children. I had a small child at the time. So still, the Dora case stayed with me through the years. I hadn't begun to write, publish anything at that point, but it remained in the back of my mind, this curious dance. It's like a dance. It's a quartet, if you will. You've got this one couple, Dora's mother, Dora's father, the other couple, Herr K and Frau K, and then there's poor Dora caught up within this quintet, whatever it was. In the back of my mind, it was there. And so as an older woman, I read the case history again. And this time I read it quite differently. And perhaps you've all had this feeling reading the same text at different times in your life. And you read it quite differently. And this time I was shocked by the way Freud treats this young girl, the way he harangues her, the way he insists that she must be in love with Herr K, who has been making advances to her, and that he basically was looking for someone who would prove his theories on dreams. He just published the interpretation of dreams, and he wanted some corroboration, or grist for his mill, if you like, de l'eau pour son moulin. So anyway, I decided, though, that Dora in this case history had no voice, and I wanted to give her a voice. So I sat down to write Dora's story. But somehow, as I began to write, and this happens when you write, Freud elbowed his way into the picture. And of course, I have to admit, there's a great deal more written about Freud than there is about young Ida Bauer, which was her real name. And though I never call her that in the book, it's who she's based on. So Freud got in there too, because Freud was youngish. He was 44. He had 6 children. He needed patience. He needed wealthy patience. And he had just published a book, and he'd only sold 300 copies. And so he wanted to be famous, and he needed money, and he needed this case. So I started to see this as a struggle between the two of them, a struggle for power. And that's really what happened with this book, when I got them both into his office. So I'm just going to read a few pages towards the beginning of the book. If anybody has it, it's chapter 2. It's called Father and Daughter. Parts of the book are in Dora's mind, or the young girl's mind, and part are in Freud's. This is her point of view. So I'll read about 10 pages. She hesitates at the top of the stairs, looking down at her father. She can hear the early afternoon sounds, the vague hum of the servants in the kitchen washing dishes, the whispering of a sad Viennese song as the swing door into the kitchen swishes open and closed, the clip-clop of the horses' hooves on the slippery, wet street. The smell of schnitzel hangs in the air. Her father preens himself like a peacock before the gold-framed mirror in the dark hall. Covering his mouth, he yawns sleepily after his copious luncheon, while she has eaten nothing at all, unable to touch the heavy food in the dark dining room, despite his encouragement. He has his grey silk hat in one kid-gloved hand and smooths his thick hair back with the other. She considers him an elegant man, with something soft, almost feminine about his face, as though the thin moustache were an afterthought. She recognizes the slightly prominent ears she has inherited, and wonders what else she might have inherited from him. He's a vain man, too. He knows everyone finds him handsome, particularly the ladies, except, ironically, his wife, who seems more interested in cleaning the house. All the other ladies like the thick auburn, slightly curly hair, the wide-spaced, dark blue eyes, the svelte, boyish form. Everyone remarks on his charm, intelligence, and considerable business acumen. She's a very fortunate girl who should be happy and not sad, or so everyone tells her, which only makes her feel worse. Despite all her advantages, she doesn't feel fortunate as she stands with her hand on this highly polished banister at the top of the green carpeted stairs in her expensive white dress. She knows she should feel grateful for the education she's received, the foreign languages, French, English, a little Italian, the Czech her parents speak, the petit point, the piano, the drawing, the dancing lessons, the horseback riding. Instead, at 17, she feels old. Her youth and vitality have already vanished. Her young body has betrayed her. She feels its leaking bitterness from all its orifices. Her body is weeping. And it's the fault of this man who stands before the mirror, her false father. She cannot bear his falseness. He lies to her. Everyone knows he does. Yet he tells her she lies. But no one says anything. The silence in the household is driving her mad. She'll always love him. How could she not, she thinks, watching him admire himself, turning his big, handsome head sideways to the mirror, tilting his dimpled chin at an advantageous angle. Yet she's in a rage with him. She feels at this moment if she could let something heavy drop directly onto his head, which from her viewpoint seems slightly too large for his slender body, and shatter his skull into a million pieces. She would. He has insisted she return to see his doctor, as if it would do any good. At breakfast a few days ago, sitting at the table alone with him, her brother had already left for the university, and her mother had not put in an appearance. She was overcome with a fit of coughing. He lay down to Feco, the newspaper he reads, from cover to cover, with all the headlines about the Hilsner case. He said, "We have to get to the bottom of all of this." For a moment she thought he was referring to the poor murdered Catholic girl, or even the poor simple-minded Jew, Hilsner, who'd been accused of killing the girl to obtain blood to make matzos. But of course, he wasn't talking about the hatred of the Jews at all. Despite her irregular education, she knows all about this, as one does about the fire that runs beneath the surface of things at all times, half hidden, but erupting dangerously and surprisingly at moments, as the burning of her father's textile factory a few years ago in Bohemia, or the accession of Lüger, the crafty man who's used Jew-baiting to become mayor of Vienna finally, despite the old emperor's efforts, or even her brother's story of the way Jewish students are treated at the university. It's an integral part of her, like her own shadow. It's not necessary to speak of it. She's always lived with it, part of the city, the Prater, the cafes. But what her father was speaking about, of course, was not that, but his own daughter's cough and all her other ailments. I don't understand what's the matter with you. You have everything in the world, all this hard-won security I've worked for all my life, he said, making a sweeping gesture towards the laden table and the polished sideboard with all its shining silver and the mirror with the invitations stuck into the sides, the blue silk curtains tied back with gold ropes and the broad servant's back as she retreated into the kitchen with the silver coffee pot. You've never lacked for anything, and though we don't live extravagantly, we've always given you everything you wanted. You had a fancy French governess to teach you whatever you wished to learn, a woman you professed to love, whom we dismissed when you asked us to. What more could you possibly want? Why so much unhappiness? What is it that's missing from your young life? She said nothing, just went on, coughing helplessly. I want you to go back and see my doctor, he said firmly, fixing her with his deep blue stare. She could only shake her head and continue coughing, that awful dry cough that shakes her whole body and takes her breath away. What have you got to lose? Her father said. I won't go. I won't. Why should I? None of them have any idea what they're doing. Doctors. Humbugs, she said scornfully, finding her voice in her anger at the thought of the pack of them. They know nothing. They all say something different. They just torture me. She put her hand to her throat, recalling the dreadful electric brush thrust into it, the electric shocks all through her body, the blast of the cold hose, the dunkings in cold baths. My dearest girl, you really cannot go on like this, her father said, looking at her with concern across the jars of golden honey, homemade strawberry jam, marmalade, the big pat of yellow butter, the scrambled eggs, the bright bowl of fruit, the loaves of half-cut dark bread, while he drummed his fingers on the starched white tablecloth impatiently. She sipped some ice water, which sometimes helped a little with the cough. Many years later, having left Austria and escaped to Brooklyn, she'll remember those Viennese breakfasts and miss that delicious dark bread. But that day she wasn't thinking of food. She said, I won't have anyone else sticking electric rods down my throat as if I were a cow and making me vomit or showering me with freezing water. What good has that done? He's not going to use electricity on you. I assure you, my dearest girl, he doesn't use it, or even hypnosis anymore, her father said, waving his fine hands in the air and adding, he has an entirely new method for curing illness. None of it does any good, she said, pushing away her plate of scrambled eggs, the sight of which made her feel ill. This conversation made her feel ill. Her father made her feel ill. He said, you're a highly intelligent girl, dearest. For goodness sake, be reasonable and take advantage of the advantages modern medicine and an excellent opportunity to get well. Looking down at his hands with the gold signet ring on his pinky, he added, this doctor has helped me, as you well know, when I was so... He looks at her and hesitates before going on. So ill. Surely he doesn't need to remind her of the time his mind was disordered and his body paralyzed. I won't go, I won't, she replied, getting up and rushing to quit the room, her silk skirt, her favourite. She has elegant clothes. Her father's been generous with her there, catching against her chair and turning it over with a clatter onto the highly polished parquet floor. She left her father sitting there alone with all the food. Sometimes leaving people or places of danger is all you can do. She knows even then. Thank you very much. to take questions or hear from you. I don't know what is. I have to say, you know, I've been teaching these classes now that came out of this book, and so I've been teaching these 5 case histories. There's the Dora case, the Rat Man, Little Hans, well, little boys he saw once, the Wolf Man, and the Present Schreiber. So these 5 case histories, and I've been teaching them as literary texts. And I have to say that what I have become most impressed with is Freud as a writer. He's a very good writer, and he knows all the tricks of the trade. He knows how to, you know, get the reader, grab the reader, how to hold the reader, how to sort of trickle in the information little by little. And to take the reader by the hand and say, I know you're going to think this is impossible, but this is what he told me. And gradually lead you to the conclusion which he, like a detective, gives you at the end of each one of these case histories. So I really admire him as a writer and as a revolutionary. You know, he put things down the way he saw them. And I think he really did listen to these women who came into his consulting rooms. He listened to them and he allowed them. And even in this case history where he perhaps makes some egregious errors with poor young Ida Bauer, but he does believe her, whereas her father says, you're making this all up. Her mother just goes along with what the father says. He believes her, he listens to her, he has his own theories about what she's saying, but I admired him for standing up for what he saw, what he observed, and what he heard, and what these women often told him. And so I have a great deal of admiration for him from that point of view. Well, first of all, I will say that the research I did was I researched and wrote, and researched and wrote. I kept writing and researching more or less at the same time. And the research I did, as I said, about Freud, of course, you could research forever. I read some of the great biographies. I read his letters. That's really very precious. If you're thinking of writing the life of somebody who really existed, go for the letters. Because there you get the voice, you know, and he had, by a miracle, these letters to Fleece, who is a character in the book, his great friend. They were kept. He burned Fleece's letters to him, but his letters that he sent to Fleece, he couldn't burn, and Fleece held on to them. And then the Princess Marie Bonaparte bought them, and Freud said, you must burn them, and he said, no, I'm not going to. So they remained, and at first not all of them were published. They didn't really, there were some that they didn't want to. You know, they're really passionate letters. He calls Fleece my other, the other, and then they have this big fight over who had discovered bisexuality, and anyway, it was a sort of passionate friendship. And many of the letters were sort of hidden for a while, but they're out now, so you can read all of that. And then I went to Vienna and walked around the city. That's very necessary, as it was with the Becoming Jane Eyre book. I had to go to Haworth to see the actual place where these Brontes lived. You have to walk, you know, amongst in that rainy place to really feel what they must have felt. But the thing for me anyway was to keep researching, keep writing, and to let the research certainly directed what I wrote. It did, to some extent. And then of course you occupy a sort of middle distance. you are not I mean, I'm obviously not Freud, and I'm not this young girl, but one thing I did do, somebody asked me once at one of these readings, how did you find the girl's voice? You know, she's 17. Where did you find the girl's voice? And I hadn't really thought about that, but I did do one thing, if you could call this research. I had some letters that my ex-husband kindly had kept, and when we parted ways, he sent them to me. And I had put them away in a drawer and never looked at them. But when I started to write this book, I thought, 17. I was 17 at the time when I wrote him these letters. I took them out, and I started rereading them, and I thought they were going to be, you know, love letters. Well, they weren't really at all. They were all about the meaning of life, you know, which is, you know, the big questions, which is really what you're interested in at that age, I think, when you still think you can maybe solve those big questions. That was pretty much my trajectory. Yes. Well, you know, I think as an older woman, having lived through feminism too, you know, so much more aware later on of the what was going on here, of this betrayal of this young girl, that everybody around her basically betrays her. You know, the father's using her, the mother doesn't dare probably stand up. And then Freud himself is using her for his own interest because he wants to prove his theories on dreams. So he's using the material that she brings him for his own purposes, basically. And I had the feeling, reading the case history, that he'd sort of pretty much forgotten the girl behind all of this, the person. You know, it was his theory that he was so excited to prove. And I sort of understood that, and you know, I can understand that as a writer. You get so involved in the story you're telling that you forget perhaps what the purpose behind all of this is. I think it was that, and so I was sort of angry in a way until I actually sat down to write it, and then I got a more balance. I hope, anyway, that I was fair to both these characters who were both struggling human beings. And Freud, you know, you have to place him within a context of time and a place, and what he was trying to do, and understand that too, trying to get people to listen to him. Yes, but thank you for the questions, very good one. Yes.
Where are you teaching?
Oh, I'm teaching at Princeton and at Columbia. Yes, I'm sorry, there's a hand up at the back there. Yes. Yes, very interesting. Yes, I mean, I did have some trepidation reading these case histories because they're incredibly frank, you know, and there again, Freud is really fearless, you know, he puts his stuff down and it's all about every bodily function you can think of. At first, the Dora case they find very difficult because they think Freud's very arrogant, and so they get very upset over that one. But little Hans, which is, you know, this 5-year-old child, and who is so funny and so endearing and, you know, really speaks up for himself, and the father writes it down diligently. They then get pulled in. And by the end of the course, I make them write a little My Trajectory with Freud essay. And they, all of them, find some of themselves in these case histories, as we all do. One wrote, from the rat man, in the rat man case, he feels his parents know his thoughts. And it's just such a, you know, kind of very, she wrote in her little essay, I also felt that my parents knew my thoughts, you know, things like this. So it's, I think it's fun for them to be able to take a look at themselves with some different viewpoint. And it's a great course to teach. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you all for your